Alright, so what we're going to do here is create our first binding using uFrame. So firstly, let's go to Window, open up the Element Designer, and mine popped up on another screen. So I'm going to throw the tab here, and I've already created a folder here called Simple Binding. That's going to be the name of our project for this tutorial. So right click on it after you've created it and go to New Element Diagram. Let's rename this to Simple Binding. Bingo. It already recognized it, but you can choose diagrams from up here if you have multiple in your project. So I'm going to right click and go to New Subsystem. And let's hit F2 to rename and call this Game Core. I'm also going to add a new scene manager. So from here, F2 to rename, let's call this Simple Binding Scene Manager. Alright. So this subsystem is where we're going to define elements for a game. And then we're going to link that subsystem to a scene manager so this scene knows which elements it needs to initialize in the scene. So since we've got this all set up, let's go ahead and hit save. And it's generated some files for us. But we want to actually go ahead and start working in the scene. So let's right click on this scene manager and go to create scene. Now in our simple binding folder, uFrame automatically creates a scenes folder so you have a organized place to keep your scenes. So I'm just going to call this simple binding scene. There we go. It goes ahead and opens up the scene for you and sets up the scene with basic uFrame necessities with the game manager and the scene manager. So the scene manager is exactly what we just created. So now that that's set up, let's go create our first element. So I double clicked on the game core to go into the game core subdiagram. And now we want to right click and go to new element. I'm going to click on it, F2 to rename, and I'm going to call this simple binding element. And I'm going to add a property called message. Hit save. So let's go up to our Unity VS menu and do generate project files. If you don't have Unity VS, you'll want to go to assets and sync mono-develop project. Because uFrame generates a lot of files, you want to make sure that this is in sync. Alright, so let's right click on our element that we just created and go to open controller file. Alright, so when the element is added to a scene via a view, this initialize method, which it's already created for you, is going to initialize that data with something. Each view has its own instance of the data that we've specified in our element, which right now is just a property of message. Let's type in simple binding element dot message equals hello world. Alright, simple enough. Let's switch back into Unity. Alright, so now that we've got our controller initializing the element, now we're in the element subdiagram. And what we want to do here is create a new view. This represents our component that we're actually going to add to this scene. So I'm going to go ahead and link this element to the view because this view represents simple binding element. So what we want to do now is just rename this to simple binding view. Alright. Now that we've created the view, let's add it to the scene. Just to make sure, we hit save first. right click on it, go to add to scene. So there we go. Now we've got this view. It's already generated all the code and it's right in the scene. Now we need to actually do something with that initialized value. So right click, go to open code, and we want to do public override message because that's the name of our property, and then it'll always be changed for properties. So message changed. So uFrame has already set up all the bindings for when this value changes. So what we want to do here is actually do something with the value when it changes. So I'm going to just do something simple here and do a debug.log value. Alright, perfect. Now let's switch back into Unity, wait for it to compile. And now let's run the scene. And as you'll notice, nothing's happened. This is because whenever you override a method, like we've just done, the message changed method, the editor is smart enough to realize that, hey, you've created a binding, but you haven't activated that binding yet. This is good because you don't want to have every view binding to every single binding for every property that you create. So we just need to activate it, and that's easy to do in the view inspector. Just go to the bindings, make sure it's expanded, and it knows that we've overridden the binding method for message. And let's just click the check. Now when we run, you'll see the hello world.